Subhadra, or even when he was propositioned by Urvashi, in both situations, he kept his moral compass quite strong. Then we discuss the sudden shift from the psychological to the cosmological. That happens at the end of the 3rd chapter and the start of the 4th chapter. Because Krishna is telling that this knowledge I have been giving since time immemorial. That this is the knowledge that is required for humanity to deal with its inner enemy. And therefore, I give this knowledge constantly. So this was the theme which I was mentioning. Let's see. Okay. So, the 3rd chapter, 336 to 43 is the last section. So 336 to 43 is the last section, where there is a psychological discussion on how we are deviated from duty and misled by karma. Are we turning this on? Yes. Sure. Fine. So let's move forward. So the fourth chapter, I just complete the summary. Then 4th chapter, Arjuna asks the question, how could he have spoken to the sun god? So there Arjuna embodies submissiveness with inquisitiveness. And then I discussed about how when Arjuna asks this question, Krishna speaks about his own divine position. And he speaks this not because he's an egotist who just wants to talk about himself, but because answering the question requires Krishna to speak his position. But Krishna is so expert that he doesn't go off on a tangent just talking about himself. He brings the discussion back to the topic under consideration, that is Karma Yoga, and how to act with detachment. Just let me know when it starts. Sure, no. So after that, now at the start of the 5th chapter, Arjuna will ask another question. And why does this? Okay, is this visible? Yeah. So basically, this is a discussion of where does the question at the start of the 4th chapter come from? That is Arjuna's 5th question. So there is a psychological discussion in 336 to 43, and there is a cosmological discussion of knowledge given to the sun god. You say, hey, these are two very different subjects. So what is the link that is missing between the two? The link is that the knowledge of how to act dutifully and how to overcome selfishness, embodied here as lust, it is provided to humanity by divinity since time immemorial. So Krishna is telling Arjuna, you are not alone in struggling against the lower desires. Humanity has been struggling always. And humanity has not been alone because divinity is always with them. And how is the divinity there? Through the knowledge provided. And this is how we fight. So that is the link between the psychological and the cosmological. And with this link, now let's move forward to the end of the 4th chapter. In the 4th chapter, Krishna talks about how to work with the sacrificial spirit. And then, in one sense, Arjuna asked the same question he has asked earlier at the start of the 5th chapter. He asked at the start of the 5th chapter the same question that he had asked earlier at the start of the 3rd chapter. So let's look specifically at what was the question and how that comes up. So let's go to 5.1, recite the verse, and then we'll look back at the previous verse. Arjuna Vacha Sannyasam Karmanam Krishna Punar Yogam Cha Shamsasi Yashreya Etayorekam Tanme Bruhi Sunishchitam. So this is Kanyasam. He says First you are talking about karma sannyasa. You are glorifying that. But then you are going punar yogam ja shamsasi. Shamsasi means to prashansa karna, stuti karna. You are praising yoga. So please tell me one thing. Shreya etayor ekam. One thing which is of the long term good to me. Please tell me. For certain, sunishchitam. So again, the essential question is, should we act in the world or renounce the world? Now to answer this, to understand what specifically led to the rising of this question, we need to go to the last verse of the previous chapter. So here the question arises immediately based on what was spoken before. So let's see. What he is saying here is, Tasmad Ajnana Sambhutam. Oh, why is it? Oh, really? That's why.
Sharing the screen, not the verse. Not sharing the Veda base.
So what do I do here?
Alt tab.
No, alt tab here. Is it coming now? No.
You are sharing, but you are only sharing the presentation.
No, how do I change this? I just shared my full screen.
So we stop the share and then we use the full desktop.
How do I stop the share? That bar is missing.
No, you go up. Krishna.
Yesterday also this had happened. The bar, I thought that the bar is coming in the it's annoying. No, I'm not sure. Not really. Sorry about this. Now if I stop video, it will come.
Escape. Press escape. Press escape.
Oh, okay, I'm simple. Okay, now stop share. And just share screen for me.
No, yeah, desktop.
Okay, sorry. That's why the words are not being decided. Sorry, I didn't realize that. Okay. So here, what happens is, Krishna is concluding this chapter, chapter 4. It is about knowledge. Tasmad ajnana sambhutam hritstham jnanasinaatmanaha chitvainam samshayam yogam atishto tishtha bharata. So tasmad ajnana sambhutam. Therefore, that which has arisen out of knowledge, of the opposite of knowledge, that is ignorance. That which is arisen out of ignorance, hritstham, that which is situated in the heart. What is that? Jnana. That ignorance which is situated in the heart, jnana asin atmanaha. With the sword of knowledge, chitvainam, cut it. Samshayam yogam. And this way, cut off all the doubts that have arisen out of ignorance, Arjuna, with the sword of knowledge. And yogam, practice yoga. And atishto tishta bharata, arise, O Bharata. Now if you see, this verse is profoundly confusing. Arjuna is in a battlefield. Which is Arjuna's favored weapon? Bow and arrow. And Krishna is telling jnana asina. It is not jnana dhanur. It is take the sword of knowledge. Now Arjuna is thinking, should I be fighting the war or not fighting the war? Krishna is saying, take the sword of knowledge and fight. He's not saying fight against the enemies. He says fight against the ignorance in your own heart. The doubts which have arisen out of ignorance. And in this way, practice yoga. So the first half of the verse seems to be talking about a metaphorical war. Now, with the sword of knowledge, fight against ignorance. But the last part of the yogam, atishto tishta bharata, arise and fight. So he says, hey, do you want me to fight metaphorically or do you want to fight literally? So that is the confusion for Arjuna over here. So in this particular verse, Krishna blends the metaphorical and the literal war. So the outer war is visible now. So the outer war is a historical war that is fought with physical weapons. And it is meant to be fought against outer enemies who have disrupted dharma. That is something which Arjuna has to fight at that time. But the inner war is universal. It has to be fought by everyone at all times. And that is fought not with physical weapons, but with the sword of knowledge. And who is it fought against? It is against our own inner doubts that stop us from doing our duties, from acting responsibly in life. So what has happened is, Krishna is speaking simultaneously at both levels. He's speaking to Arjuna at a historical level, and he's speaking to all of humanity at a universal level. So Arjuna gets confused. Hey, do you want me to literally fight or not? Okay, we're going to fight with a sword of knowledge against ignorance. Then I can do that. I don't have to do it in the battlefield. So do you want me to be in the battlefield or not? That's the question. So here, and Arjuna has this question, Krishna says, actually, both karma sannyas and karma yoga are good. But karma yoga is better. Why? Because you can be well situated in that. So this is basically the question. When we are speaking, the key challenge is that the speaker has a particular level of knowledge and the audience has a particular level of knowledge. So the speaker needs to speak according to the level of the knowledge of the audience. Not according to that level, slightly more than that level. That's how we'll give it interesting, stimulating, challenging. But it's way above that level of knowledge, then it becomes very difficult. The audience just feels, oh, it all goes above my head. Now, what does above that my head mean? It's just like if we're trying to catch something, maybe somebody's throwing some gifts. Maybe some prasad is being, after a theatra is being thrown, or some the gifts are being thrown. But they're throwing it at us, but they're throwing it a height way above us. We stretch and stretch, we just can't catch it. So it goes above our head. So when the knowledge goes above our head, we can't understand it. So that's what Arjuna is feeling over here. What are you talking about? Is it literal or metaphorical? Now Krishna is not being intentionally difficult. He is talking at two levels. And that two level of talking is what is confusing Arjuna. So what does it mean for me literally? This is where scripture sometimes can become confusing. Because a scripture may contain universal knowledge, but also spoken at a particular context at a particular time. And when it is spoken at a particular time, that message is not universal. The Gita's message is not that everybody has to raise weapons and fight, at least the external war. So which part of scripture is contextual and which part of scripture is universal? That requires intelligence to understand. And mistaking the two can be a problem. So now Prabhupada is very careful that we don't mistake the two. We'll talk about this a little later in the 6th chapter. But Krishna answers, okay, there is two levels, both are good, but Karma Yoga is better. And then he goes into explain what is Karma Yoga. And after he explains what is Karma Yoga, then he culminates the 5th chapter in two things. First, he gives a brief glimpse in 5:27 and 28 of Dhyana Yoga. And in 5:29, he gives a glimpse of Bhakti Yoga. It's like if somebody is having a TV series. So sometimes at the end of one TV show, one episode, they give like a trailer of the next show. So what happens is people come back and watch the next show also. So sometimes trailers are given separately, sometimes trailers are a part of the previous shows. So here at the end of the 5th chapter, Krishna is giving a peek. It's not a trailer, like a peek, a sneak peek as they call it. A sneak peek of chapter 6, which is Dhyana Yoga, and a sneak peek of Bhakti Yoga, which will be described from chapter 7 to 12. So now, after this, let's move on. In the 6th chapter, Krishna starts talking about Dhyana Yoga. Now, why is he talking about Dhyana Yoga over here? Because his purpose is, yes, there is a right time to renounce the world. What is that right time? After your mind has stopped being your enemy. So generally for most of us, our mind often works very counterproductive. And to some extent, our mind can drive any of us insane. But we outsource the responsibility for our sanity to society. I explain what I mean. We outsource the responsibility to keep us sane to society. That means that every moment, am I audible? The problem? Yeah, I'm not sure. Video is not clear. Oh. Should I just try mine? Means, is it the bandwidth problem or is it the?
From YouTube standpoint, it is coming clear. You can continue.
Okay.
There's a projection.
Okay. So what happens is, at each moment of time, there are hundreds of things we can do. For example, right now, I can move my hands in a particular way. I can maybe scratch my head. I can put my hand in my ear. Relating the hundreds of things that we can do at all times can drive us crazy. Now, so what happens is, most of the times, when we have many choices, we think about the people around us. What will they think about this? What will they think about if I do this or if I don't do this? And now society doesn't always guide us to do the right thing, but in general, just being around people limits the options that we have. Say, if we feel very angry about someone, we may want to speak all kinds of foul words. But if we are around people who are cultured, I can't speak that. So basically what happens is, our mind can come up with all kinds of crazy or uncivilized options to act. But society regulates most of those options, prevents us from acting that way. In that sense, when our mind can drive us crazy, society keeps us sane. So now if somebody will renounce society and go to the world, that means they will be alone. No, they will not be alone. They will be alone with their mind. And no society to regulate the mind's crazy influences. So therefore, Krishna is telling Arjuna repeatedly, renouncing prematurely is dangerous. So when is somebody ready to renounce the world? When their mind stops coming up with crazy options. When their mind stops acting like an enemy, that is the time when they can renounce the world. And that's why this 6th chapter begins with how the mind can be the friend, the enemy, and then the mind has to become equipoised. So when will the mind act like an enemy? When suddenly, oh, this is good. I want it and I want it at all costs. This is terrible. I can't live with this. I'm going to get rid of it no matter what the cost. So generally, when the mind's likes and dislikes are very strong, then the mind can drive us crazy. So when the likes and dislikes of the mind have become regulated, minimized, one has become situated in equanimity, equal vision towards all things. Krishna says, Samaloshta Shmukanchana. See stone and gold equally. And Surun Mitra Yudhyasina Madhyastadvesha Bandhushu. See people equally. That's when you can practice seclusion in the forest and secluded meditation. But that is difficult for most people. So Krishna says, at that time you can go and practice. And then when he says this, Krishna describes the entire process of Ashtanga Yoga from 6:10 to 6:32. And 6:33, Arjuna asks a question. So this is, chapter 2 had 2 questions, chapter 3 had 2 questions, chapter 4 had how many questions? 1 question. The sun god is superior to you, is senior to you. Chapter 5 had again 1 question at the start of the question, chapter. So till now we have covered 6 questions. So in the 6th chapter, there are 2 more questions. So Arjuna asks a question. Now the question that Arjuna asks is also significant. Generally speaking, what happens is, when a student asks a question, the question indicates not only the desire of the student, but also the level of the student. So somebody asks a question, what is the proof for the existence of God? Well, that means that the person is at a very initial stage of the spiritual journey. If somebody asks, why is the description of Krishna given in the Bhagavad Gita and say the Krishna given in the Bhagavatam? Is it different? Why is it different? Oh, that means this person already knows these two books somewhat. So the question reveals not only the desire, but also the level. So when Arjuna asks the question, he says that, oh Krishna, you told me this process of going out, of going to the forest and, okay, sorry, let me share the screen. Going to the forest and renouncing the world. This, we know the verse which Arjuna asks that the mind is very difficult to control. Chanchalami mana Krishna. But the verse before that is very significant. That actually tells Arjuna's objection. See, Arjuna is a person who has already gone to the forest. He has lived in the forest twice when he was in exile. He has even practiced yoga. When he went to the Himalayas, he went to the Himalayas and performed, sat in yogic posture and performed tapasya so that he could satisfy the devatas and get various weapons. So in one sense, the practices that Krishna has told Arjuna, Arjuna has already done those. Then what is Arjuna's difficulty? So that difficulty he mentions in 633. This is the verse before Chanchalami mana Krishna. Arjuna vacha yoyam yogastvaya proktaha samyena madhusudana etasyaham na pashyami chanchalatvat sthitim sthiram. So he's saying, this yoga practice that you told me, yoyam yogas tvaya proktaha, what you have spoken to me, it is centered on samyena. It is centered on equanimity, equal disposition, equilibrium. So he says, etasyaham na pashyami. I can't see it. Now when we see it, here the word see is used non-literally. Like sometimes somebody explains something, I see your point. That doesn't mean I see some point floating in the sky and I caught sight of it. So I see your point, what it means is, I understand what you're saying. So it's metaphorical. So Krishna is saying, I don't see the point. I don't see how this is possible. Etasyaham na pashyami. So why is not pashyami? Chanchalatvat sthitim stiram. Some of the verses of Bhagavad Gita are very poetic. And if you translate them, if we try to see the poetic aspect, it's beautiful. See here, sthira is steady. And chanchala is what? Unsteady. So, and sthiti is state or situation. So what is Krishna telling? The steady state of the mind is to be unsteady. Chanchalatvat sthitim stiram. So the mind is steadily unsteady. Two people fall in love with each other and they say, I can't live without you. And 6 months later, they are sitting across a divorce attorney's table and they say, I can't live with you. So what has happened is, the steady state of the mind is to be unsteady. Chanchalatvat sthitim stira. One day, I love my job. It's the best thing in the world. Next day, I hate my job. I couldn't have got a worse job in my life. That's the steady state of the mind is to be unsteady. Now, of course, these are extreme unsteadiness. We may not go to that extremes on a regular basis, but we all experience this. So Arjuna is telling Krishna, samyena. He's saying that actually going to the forest and performing austerity is not difficult. But having equal vision, that is not possible. Because my mind gets dragged by emotions. When I see Yudhishthira, I feel respect for him. When I see Duryodhana, I feel anger toward him. And this, I can't be equal toward both of them. How can I be? So this samyena is not possible. So the external practice of yoga is not difficult for Arjuna. But at that time when Arjuna practiced the external yoga, that was not for spiritual realization. That was for material acquisition. It's for gaining some weapons. But here, when Krishna has told him to practice yoga, the purpose is not just sitting in the yogic postures, it's ultimately calming the mind. Yogas chitta vritti nirodha, as Yoga Sutra says. Patanjali Yoga Sutra says. So what happens is, Krishna is saying this samyena, this equanimity of the mind is extremely difficult. And that's when he says, the steady state of the mind is to be unsteady, and then he speaks the next words. Chanchalamimana Krishna Pramati Valavaduram, the words we talk about. That controlling the mind is very difficult. Now, Arjuna never had to go to see a psychologist or psychiatrist. Arjuna didn't have the problems of the uncontrolled mind that typically afflict human society today. Arjuna never had to take any antidepressant pills. So when he is saying my mind is wild and uncontrolled, he is not talking from our perspective. When we feel suddenly depressed, we feel stressed, we feel hyper anxious, we have anxiety attacks or whatever. He's not talking from that perspective. Although that words can apply in that perspective also. He's talking from the point of maintaining equanimity. It's impossible. As soon as I see Duryodhana, a particular set of emotions will come in my mind. As soon as I see Yudhishthira, a different set of emotions will come. And if I try to restrain that, it is not possible. So that is Arjuna's concern. Now here, we'll see how expertly Krishna addresses this question. I mentioned at the start of our session that how we will be discussing not just what the questions and answers in the Gita are, but also what they reveal about Krishna and Arjuna. So here we see Arjuna's level through his question. And then we will see Krishna's sensitivity over here. The first thing that Krishna speaks is, it's not here. Many of us we know this verse. So Arjuna has asked this question. The mind is very, very difficult to restrain. And what does Krishna reply? Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Asamshayam Mahabaho Mano Durnigraham Chalam Abhyasena tu Kaunteya Vairagyena cha gruhyate. So the first thing Krishna says is undoubtedly, asamshayam, mahabaho. Arjuna, you are powerful, but mano durnigraham chalam. The mind is very difficult to control. It's interesting, Krishna normally uses this word asamshayam when he is making some proclamation. Like Sarvadharman Pratyaja Mam Ekam Sharanam Aham Tam Sarpapevi Mokshayishyami Ma Shucha. I'm not there. Antakale cha Mameva Swarmuktva Kaleva. We are prayers about Bhagavad Gita Samshaya. So undoubted, there's no doubt that what I am saying is true, Krishna is saying. But it's here that same unreserved declaration. Krishna is saying, there's no doubt that what you're saying is right. Normally when we say there's no doubt, have no doubt that what I am speaking is right. Imagine a questioner telling the audience, there's no doubt that your question is for real. The questioner will feel so vindicated by that. So generally, whenever somebody asks a question, there is a rational side to the question and there is an emotional side to the question. Like the rational side is the content of the question. Okay, this is the question. But people are, whenever some question is asked, there's some emotion over there. And a good answer needs to address both the rational and the emotional side. And depending on which is prominent, that has to be addressed first. So here, Raja says the mind is very difficult. Krishna affirms, yes, it is true, it is difficult. For us, when we face some problems, one of the biggest needs that we have is the need to be understood. Even if somebody is not able to offer us a solution to our problems, but just there, yeah, you're going through a tough time. I don't know how you're facing this. You must have a lot of inner strength. If there's anything I can do, please let me know. Just that empathy, that understanding is very helpful. There are different degrees of loneliness. In UK, the government has formed an official ministry for loneliness. Because there is so people who are lonely that you have to deal with it. Now there is one kind of loneliness where one is physically alone. That is not always bad. That can also be solitude if we are contemplative, if we are thoughtful. But there's another kind of loneliness when we are physically alone and we don't want to be physically alone. But Maybe nobody is there with us, nobody wants to be with us, which is even worse. But suppose we are surrounded by people, but not one of those people understands us. We are making a point, and everybody is having a different viewpoint. Everybody is just not understanding what we are saying. That is the worst kind of loneliness. The worst kind of loneliness is what? To be surrounded by people who don't understand us. So we just feel suffocated. I want to be out of here. So just as the body needs oxygen, the heart needs understanding. We don't always need solutions, but we at least need to be understood. And Krishna is demonstrating that over here. The modern self-help teachers sometimes talk that seek first to understand before you want to be understood. So Krishna is demonstrating that over here. Arjuna, I understand you. Yes, this is difficult. Asamshayam Mahabhav. The mind is extremely difficult to control. In there, Krishna shows empathy. And then it doesn't tell a specific processes. By practice and by detachment, one can manage to discipline the mind. Just reassures Arjuna. Then Arjuna has a second question. The first question is, this is too difficult. The second question is, okay, you say it's not difficult, it's possible, but this may take too long. This may take too long. And what if I die before I complete this? What if I can't persist long enough? Then what will happen? And then there are 3 verses over which Arjuna asks the question. And there also Krishna demonstrates how we need sometimes to encourage before we enlighten. Generally, education has these 2 aspects. We need to encourage and we need to enlighten. Enlighten means this is the right thing, this is the wrong thing. Encourage is, yes, you can do it. You need to encourage. So both of these are required for effective education. And which is required when that is the expertise of the teacher. If you only enlighten without encouraging, then what happens is, this is the right thing to do and do it. So Krishna could have told Arjuna, Arjuna says that, this is so difficult, this will take too long. He says, you lazy bum, just get up, work hard, pull yourself up and do it. That was not what Arjuna needed at that time. So if you only enlighten without encouraging, people may know the right thing, but they will feel, oh, it's all inaccessible. It's all impossible for me. On the other hand, say if you envision a pendulum, one side of the pendulum is enlighten, the other side of the pendulum is encourage. If you only encourage, but don't enlighten, and what will happen is, that person will, okay, encourage, but they don't know what to do. Suppose somebody wants to learn car driving. Okay, this is the gas, this is the brake, this is how you handle the steering wheels. And then, no, what if I hit somebody, what if I hit the pavement? No, you can do it. And they need encouragement. But suppose somebody sits into a car, they have never really driven a car. They don't know anything. You can do it. You can do it. Hey, what can I do? What have I meant to do? So if you only encourage without enlightening, that will not work. So both have to be there. And depending on the state of mind of a person. Now somebody is already confident. You can do it. Yeah, no, I can do it, but tell me how to do it now. So some people don't need encouragement. They just need enlightenment. Tell me how to do it. Suppose we're quite proficient at working on computers. But right now our computer is not working. And we ask someone, can you help me fix the computer? Yes, no, computers are not very difficult to use. You can use it. I've been using it all my life, but this is not working right now. I don't need encouragement at that time. Just fix it for me. So that is important. So here, Krishna senses Arjuna's mood. And Krishna enlightens, but in both these answers, first Krishna encourages. So let's look at this verse. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Parthanaive Anamutra Vinashastasya Vidyate Nahi Kalyana Kaschet Durgatim Tata Gacchati. So Krishna is, the second question that Arjuna has asked is, this may take too long. And if I renounce the world to grow spiritually, then what is going to happen is I'm not going to attain anything materially because I have renounced material life. But if I do not succeed spiritually, then I'll not get anything spiritually also. So I will lose both ways. I lose materially, I lose spiritually. That was his question. And Krishna says, no, Partha, naiveha namutra, not in this, not in even in this world, not in the amutra, the next world. Neither in this world nor in the next world, vinashastasya vidyate, will that person meet with destruction. And which is this person? This person who is described in the next line. Nahi kalyana krit kaschit, one who does good, my friend, will never meet with evil, will never meet a bad destination. Durgatim tat gacchati. This is one of the most reassuring verses in the Gita. One who is doing good, one who is engaged in auspicious work, will never meet with inauspiciousness. So does this mean that no bad things will happen? No, he's saying, Durgatim tat gacchati. The destination will never be inauspicious. In life, difficulties will come upon everyone, but the ultimate destination will always be auspicious. And then, after giving this categorical assurance, one who does good, my friend, will not meet with evil. After giving this categorical assurance, then Krishna enlightens. He enlightens, okay, what will happen to that person if they practice a little spiritual life, a little spiritual growth, if they got a lot of spiritual growth, and he goes with technicalities. We'll not go into that over here. But in these two questions, or the answers to these questions, we see Krishna as an empathic teacher. Not just an enlightening teacher, but also an encouraging teacher. Now, after describing this, okay, I'll stop here. Are there any questions or comments at this point before we move ahead? Okay, yes, ma'am.
So this mind, the different words used, chitta, mana, is controlling the mind. What are we talking about controlling it? What is the function of the mind?
Okay. What is the function of the mind? What are we trying to control? It's a complex thing, but let's keep it simple. As a function, see, just as the body is an instrument for the soul, and when the body is not functioning properly, what happens is we can't go about. We may not be able to walk, we can't lift things, maybe we can't talk. So the body is meant to help us do things in the world. The mind, similarly, one of its functions, not all of its functions, the mind's function is clear perception. Here I'm using the word mind generically, not specifically. In the yoga texts, sometimes the word is used both ways. That means there is a physical body and there is a subtle body. Sometimes the word mind is used to refer to the entire subtle body. So basically, we have a gross body for acting in the world, and we have a subtle body for perceiving the world. So a healthy mind is one which helps us perceive things properly. When the mind is unhealthy, it just misperceives things. That means what? How do we know that the mind is out of control? Generally, we use the word mind out of control. In contemporary circles, people use the word unhealthy mind, mental health problems. So imagine somebody says, somebody is walking along a road and some stranger is just running by, just pushes this person. This person just stumbles a little bit. And from that, this person thinks, the whole world is my enemy. Everybody walks over me. Everybody tramples over me. And I've never been able to do anything because everybody is out to target me. Now, what has happened over here is, that incident happened. But this is not a clear perception, this is not accurate perception. You could say this is not only an inaccurate perception, it's a toxic perception. It's a destructive perception. So generally, the mind is a tool for perception. And when we say control the mind or keep the mind healthy, that means we are able to perceive things properly. So if we are not able to perceive things properly, that means our mind is unhealthy. Now there can be different degrees of lack of health of the mind. We could say anybody who is materialistic, they are not pursuing spiritual reality, so they are unhealthy. That is true, but at least that person is functioning reasonably in the material world. But if somebody can't even function materially, that means they have hallucinations or something like that, then that's even more, that's what in common parlance is called sickness of the mind. So the mind is an instrument of perception, and to control the mind means to be able to get it to perceive things properly. So now, yes, go.
Just a comment. The goodness cookie that you saw is that part of this verse is 6.40. Does good is never overcome by the very what is better than the goodness.
Oh, okay, beautiful. Thank you. So you're already distributing this verse sweetness. Wonderful. Thank you. Now, at the start of the 7th chapter, what happens is Krishna has envisioned, Krishna starts from Karma Yoga, goes to Dhyan Yoga, and then he says, who is the topmost yogi? That person who has fixed the mind on me, Yoginava Sarveshwara. And then it is at this point that Krishna starts addressing Arjuna's question. Arjuna's question was, this process is very difficult. Krishna doesn't really tell yes or no at that time. He says, actually, you practice diligently, you'll be able to manage the mind. But then Krishna says, I will tell you another process to get to the level of yogic perfection. Perfection is to become attached to me. So he's given one process, gradual progression from Karma Yoga to Dhyan Yoga to absorption in Krishna, which is Bhakti Yoga. And at 7.1, he will say, now I will tell you another process by which you can make your mind fixed. So that is the beginning of the second section of the Gita, that is 7th chapter to the 12th chapter. And we will see a significant difference in the tone and the mood of this chapter. What happens is, till now, Krishna has repeatedly been talking about detachment, equanimity, basically anasakti. But suddenly the first word of the 7th chapter is Mai asakta manaha. Here is asakti. So till now Krishna has been talking, be detached from the material. But now he says, become attached to the spiritual. So the idea is, if you become attached to the spiritual, automatically you become detached from the material. But this signifies that the Bhakti section starting. Because Bhakti is not so much about detachment as it is about attachment. In the path of Bhakti, how much we can turn away from the world is not as important as how much we are turning toward Krishna, which is much more important. Say when you fast on Ekadashi, some of us may be able to fast Nirjal, and that's nice if we can. But the purpose of fasting Nirjal is not just to turn away from food, it is to turn toward Krishna. It is focus on Krishna more, remember Krishna more. If I am fully fasting from food, and then I'm constantly looking who is going to the kitchen, who is eating what, and how much are they eating. And you think, this person is so attached, this person is so uncontrolled, this person is such a sense gratifier. Then what is happening? Our body may be fasting, but our ego is feasting. Our ego is feasting. And that fasting will not take us toward Krishna. On the other hand, somebody may on Ekadashi take 3 meals, but they humbly Krishna. And I'm so conditioned, I'm so attached. I want to connect with you. I want to surrender to you. And they pray reverentially. So that is more important. So I'm not saying fasting is bad, not at all. What I'm saying is that the purpose of fasting is not just to exhibit our willpower to the world, exhibit our determination to the world. It is to express our devotion to Krishna. Krishna, I don't want to be distracted by anything in this world. I just want to focus on you. So that's the theme from the 7th chapter. Mai asakta manaha. And then how to become attached to Krishna. So Krishna starts explaining how I am not just one person existing somewhere. I underlie and unify all of existence. That's why the Sutre Manigana Eva verse comes, that I am the thread in the necklace of the world. And then after Krishna describes how he pervades the world, he describes how he is a sustaining principle for all the Devatas, how he underlies the Brahman, and how he is the ultimate reality. That's the essence of the 7th chapter. Then at the end, Krishna does something very interesting. Sometimes what happens, this happened with me in my early years. One speaker was in a class and he said that, okay, I'll speak 3 points. And at the end of the class, he spoke 2 points. So then I raised my hand. I said, you want to speak 3 points? He said, I only had 2 points to speak. But I said that I'll speak 3 points to check if anybody heard that attentively to ask a question. So what happens is, sometimes the speaker may speak some things which should raise questions. And if that doesn't raise questions, then that raises a big question. But why? Because is the audience really hearing? Now, we are all in the Bhakti tradition. And we are practicing Bhakti. Now, if I say that, okay, if a speaker comes and says, okay, today I'm going to give a class on Shankaracharya's commentary on Vedanta Sutra. Okay, why? That's impersonal. That's why I'm studying that. There should be some question about that. Otherwise, maybe there's a big question. Does the audience even understand what is Bhakti? Are they even interested in Bhakti? So Krishna, in one sense, at the end of this chapter, tests Arjuna's attention. What does he do? In verses 29 and 30, suddenly Krishna drops several words which are quite technical. So it's a little long. I just quickly recite it myself. Sadhi bhutadi daivam mam sadhi yagyam cha yevidu prayana kale pichamam devidur yukta chetasaha. So Krishna uses, in the previous verse also uses what? Karma chakhilam. So he uses basically 8 terms. And some of them are familiar, some of them are technical. And then suddenly it's Adi Bhuta, Adi Daiva, Adi Yagya. These terms are not used by Krishna before. And then he's just checking what is Arjuna's response. And immediately in 8.1 and 2, Arjuna asks, what do these terms mean? And significantly, Arjuna asks questions about these terms in exactly the same sequence in which Krishna has used the terms. So, Krishna, in one sense, Krishna sets a test and Arjuna passes that test of basic attention. So, is he attentive? And it seems that these are all complicated terms, like Brahma and Adhyatma and Adibhuta. And Krishna gives very terse answers to these terms. In fact, if you go to the 8th chapter, in just 2 verses or in less than 2 verses, Krishna summarizes most of those terms. And then after that, he focuses on one concept, that is prayana kala or antakala. So now these terms are quite often used in the Upanishads, and the Gita commentators elaborate those terms quite a bit. But they are technical terms. And Krishna doesn't seem to be interested in giving an elaborate definition of those terms. Krishna focuses on what is relevant for Arjuna. And what is relevant is prayana kala, antakala. Before this, the time of death has been referred to once by Krishna in the 2nd chapter. The last verse, Esha Brahmi Siti Partha Nainam Prapya Vimoyati Sthitva Asyam Antakalepi Brahma Nirvana Richati. If one is situated in this consciousness at the time of death, then one will attain spiritual perfection. So this is the 2nd time in 730, Krishna refers to Antakal, and the whole 8th chapter is based on Antakal. So what happens is, Krishna again shows his expertise as a teacher. There are many terms he could discuss, but he's focusing on what is relevant for Arjuna. Why is Antakal relevant for Arjuna? Because they are on the battlefield. Death can come at any time. In fact, death can come at any time for anyone, anywhere. But on a battlefield, it is much more probable. So Krishna addresses that. That's the contextual reason. But there is another reason for talking about death. What Krishna is doing is, in the 6th chapter, what is the path that Krishna has talked about? Which path? Ashtanga Yoga, Dhyana Yoga. In the 7th chapter, Bhakti Yoga. So what now Krishna is doing is, he is using Antakal, the time of death, as as a reference point or the parameter for comparing Ashtanga Yoga and Bhakti Yoga. So he is given these two paths. Now, which is to be recommended? So then he describes that the purpose is we have to remember God at the time of death. And both these paths can help us remember. But which is easier? So Arjuna had asked earlier, oh, this process of fixing the mind, calming the mind, steadying the mind is very difficult. So Krishna says, yes, it is difficult, but the right process will help you to do it. And which is the right process? He will explain over here. What he does is, he talks about Ashtanga Yoga and how one has to Bhruvor Madhye Pranamavesh Samyak. Describes the process. It's quite a challenging process by which, and then also he said at the end, Bhaktya Yukto Yoga Balena Chaiva. I say practice yoga, but even then one will require bhakti to fix the mind on me. And then you can attain the ultimate destination. But then there's one verse, in fact, it's the only verse I found in the Gita, where Krishna says this is easy. And that in one sense is the answer to Arjuna's question, oh, calming the mind is very difficult. But it is easier by the practice of bhakti. So let's recite this. Ananya Cheta Satatam Yomam Smarati Nityashaha Tasyaham Sulabha Partha Nitya Yuktasya Yoginaha. So Krishna is saying over here that those who constantly remember me, I am easy to attain. Sulabha. And easy to attain. And this word is significant because just earlier in the 7th chapter, Krishna used the opposite word. Again in the context of Bhakti. Durlabha. Bahunam janmanamante jnanavan mam prapadyate Vasudeva sarvamiti samatma sudurlabha. So even the same prefix, sudurlabha and sulabha. So su prefix is the same over there. It's extremely difficult and it's extremely easy. Sulabha, easily attained. So now when they say, is fixing the mind on Krishna easy? Say it's difficult. Well, there's a reference point for comparing. As compared to going through the process of Ashtanga Yoga and fixing the mind on Krishna, thereby fixing the mind on Krishna through Bhakti Yoga is relatively easier. So Krishna is saying this is easy. Then now, here the 8th chapter goes on. Krishna compares material and spiritual worlds, and then he says how we need to fix the mind on him. And then he talks about how in the yoga process, again, at the time of death, you have to die at a particular time. You have to control your breath so that the last breath happens at a particular time. But in Bhakti Yoga, all that is not required. And he concludes by saying Bhakti Yoga is glorious. That whatever fruits you'll get by any other path, you'll get it all by the practice of Bhakti Yoga. And there are some chapters in the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna speaks without being prompted. And we don't have the time to go through all the chapters like that. But there, what is happening is, there are two reasons. One is that Krishna is just in ecstasy. Krishna just wants to keep speaking. And the second is, there is a shift in direction that Krishna intentionally wants to take. Like 6th chapter to 7th chapter, there is no question. But there's a shift in direction. From detachment from the world to attachment to Krishna. In the 9th chapter, what happens is Krishna himself Krishna starts speaking. What is he speaking? He's speaking about the glory of Bhakti. How is it that Bhakti can give better results than all other paths? He describes that.
No, that's a projection.
Okay. By the way, when I was showing the verse was there or no?
Yeah.
So, this is steadily unsteady. Okay. So in the 9th chapter, Krishna speaks about Bhakti Yoga. And what he's doing is, he's comparing Bhakti Yoga with other paths. When Krishna has said that, oh, whatever results you get by other paths, you can get by Bhakti. So he actually compares it 4 ways. So the other paths give temporary results, Bhakti gives eternal results. That is 9.20, 21, 22 compares. And he says, Bhakti, other paths require elaborate rituals. Bhakti is very simple. That is Patram Pushpam Phalam. And then he says, other paths, if you commit sinful activities, you'll be disqualified. But he says, in Bhakti, even if somebody does something wrong, he says the process of Bhakti will itself elevate the person. Apichet Sudaracha. And then he says, in other paths, if somebody is low-born, then they cannot practice it. If many of the Vedic rituals, only Brahmanas can do it. Maybe some Kshatriyas. Other low people, those who are low-born can't do it. But he says, Bhakti is such that everyone can do it. So in these 4 ways, the eternality of the result, the simplicity of the process, the potency of the process, and the universality of the process. In these 4 ways, he demonstrates how Bhakti provides everything else that Jnana, that other paths provide, and Bhakti provides more. And then after describing this, Krishna continues in the 10th chapter, describing the glory of Bhakti Yoga. And then we come to the Chaturshloki Gita. Chaturshloki Gita is where Krishna in essence describes how Bhakti is the heart of his message. And how there's a loving reciprocation between him and Krishna, between him and his devotee, here Arjuna. And then Arjuna speaks. So Arjuna speaks several verses over there. He speaks Param Brahma, Param Dhama, Pavitram Paramam Bhavan. So in one sense, when Arjuna is speaking these verses, the Bhagavad Gita has ended over here as a class. I'll explain what I mean by that. Let's go there on screen. Yeah, all the verses. So the Chaturshloki comes from, do you remember which are the verses of Chaturshloki? 8 to 11, thank you. So then from 12, Arjuna is speaking. So what does Arjuna? 12 and 13 is speaking, Param, you Krishna, you are the supreme reality. You are the ultimate truth. You are all pure. You are the supreme person. So what is the significance of this? Ultimately, if we want to know what is the conclusion of the Gita, some people say that, you people, you always explain everything from the Bhakti perspective. No, the Bhagavad Gita is much more inclusive than you are. Well, yes, the Bhagavad Gita is inclusive, but it is not inconclusive. Yes, the Bhagavad Gita accepts Karma Yoga as a valid path. The Bhagavad Gita accepts even the worship of the Devatas as a valid path. The Bhagavad Gita also accepts Jnana Yoga as a valid path. But that does not mean that the Bhagavad Gita does not give its own conclusion. See, to be not inclusive, to be exclusive means that this is the only path. That is not what Krishna says. Krishna gives a recommendation, but that is, he's not saying other paths are useless. And we will, if we get to 1866, we'll discuss what that verse means. So the Bhagavad Gita is inclusive. But inclusive does not mean it is whatever you want you do. Once Prabhupada was asked, I don't know which verse says this. But actually, Krishna says, whatever you do, you will come to me. Prabhupada said, if that were Krishna's teaching, then there was no need for Krishna to do any teaching. Isn't it? If whatever we are doing, we're going to come to Krishna, then why does Krishna have to speak the Gita? Isn't it? So that is not, so it is inclusive, but it is not inconclusive. So how do we know the conclusion of the Gita? Well, one way, a most reliable way, is to ask the original student of the Gita. Now, suppose there has been some celebrated discussion, say some technical nuclear physics between a Nobel laureate nuclear physicist and a budding nuclear physicist. And then we have the transcript of that class. What is this Nobel laureate nuclear physicist say? I don't understand. And they discuss many subjects. And then, okay, but what was the essential message? How do we know that? One way to know it is, what is the understanding of the original student of them? What is the original Sadhana? Oh, so, sir, you talked about this, and this is what you said. And if the Nobel laureate teacher doesn't contradict, then what does it mean? That means this understanding is correct, isn't it? So here, Arjuna is giving his understanding. And Krishna doesn't say that's wrong. That's not right. Krishna doesn't say that. In fact, Krishna expresses pleasure with Arjuna. So if we consider Arjuna has accepted Krishna as the supreme authority. Krishna as the ultimate reality. He accepts Krishna's supreme position. In general, in spiritual texts or spiritual circles, there are two driving questions. There is sadhan and sadhya. There is path and purpose. Okay, where are we meant to go and how are we meant to go there? What is the purpose of life and what is the path to that place? Like if I'm here and if I want to go from here to Portland. Okay, so where do I want to go? Portland. That's the purpose. And what is the path? I can go by car, I can go by train, I can go by flight, I can go by bus, whatever. I can walk and go. That's not feasible, but we can do that. So there's purpose and path. So Krishna is talking about what is the purpose and what is the path. So now Arjuna started by thinking, my path is fighting and my purpose is winning the kingdom. Krishna says, no. Your purpose is to attain me. And your path is Bhakti Yoga. A part of Bhakti Yoga is fighting in this war here. So that sadhya as Bhagavan Krishna, not Brahman, not Devatas, not Swarga, that is expressed by Arjuna over here. So these words of Arjuna are like that nuclear physics student expressing their understanding to the Nobel laureate. And here we understand what is the sadhya. Here Krishna doesn't tell the sadhana. Sadhya is the destination. Krishna, you are the destination. You are the one to be attained. And now what is the path? That Arjuna will say at the end of the Gita. We will discuss that. At the end of the Gita, Arjuna says, Karishye vachanam tava. He doesn't say, I will fight. I will fight could mean that I is doing Kshatriya duty. But he says, I will do your will. That is Bhakti Yoga. Arjuna is not thinking in contextual terms. I am a Kshatriya and I have to fight. He says, I am a devotee. I am a part of Krishna and I have to do my part. So I will do my part. Karishye vachanam tava. So that 1873 gives us Arjuna's understanding of the sadhana. So this 10, 12, 13 gives Arjuna's understanding of the sadhya. That is Bhagavan, Krishna. And the sadhana is Bhakti. So Arjuna's words are not just significant because he's asking questions. Arjuna's words are also significant because they reveal the conclusive understanding of the Gita. The conclusive understanding it is not only a conclusive understanding of the original student of the Gita, but the conclusive understanding of the original student spoken in the presence of the teacher, which indicates the approval of the teacher. So now with that understanding, Arjuna asks the question over here. So what does he ask? He says, there are two verses over there. Let's focus on one verse. Does anyone remember which is this question? Good, I forgot. Let us see. Chapter 2, 2 questions. Chapter 3, 2 questions. Chapter 4, 1 question. Chapter 5, 1 question. That makes 6. Chapter 6, 2 questions. That is 8. Then chapter 8, 1 question. That is 9. So now, chapter 9, no question. Yeah, so chapter 10, you come to 10th question. Chapter 11 is 2 questions. So we'll have that disparity again. But so chapter 10th question is there. So what is the question? Katham vidyamaham yogims tvam sada parichintayan keshu cha bhaveshu chintyosi bhagavan maya. So he's asking Krishna, you just told me that we should all remember you. Bhakti Yoga centered on remembering you is, we discussed 8:14. That is the way to easily attain you. And Krishna also talked about in the Chaturshloki Gita, which we didn't recite, that there also remembrance, machitta madgata prana. So he says, Krishna, you told me to remember you, But how can I remember you in the world? Arjuna has more or less understood that I have to fight a war. So fighting a war means he's going to be in the world. So bhaveshu, here bhav refers to material manifestation. Keshu keshu cha bhaveshu chintyosi bhagwan. How can I remember you, O Lord, while I am functioning in the world? When we look at material manifestations. So then in answering this question, Krishna first expresses pleasure. Hantate kathayishami. Hanta means, oh, wonderful, great. I will tell you. Hanta is just an expression of joy. I will speak about how you can remember me. I will speak about my manifestations in this world. And what happens over here is that Krishna starts speaking about his vibhutis. The idea is, Arjuna, you are fighting in this war. You will see great archery skills. You will see great mace skills. You will see giant elephants. You will see fast horses. Anything special that you see in the world, understand that its speciality comes from me. Vibhuti. Bhuti means existence. Vibhuti means special existence. Anything that is special in existence catches our attention. Now, if we say after this program, there is prasad. I don't know. It's not a guarantee it is there. It is there. Okay. So now when there's prasad, okay, there's maybe we are having rice, dal, sabji, chapati. Then they're fine. If there's some sweet, oh, that's special. That's where attention goes first, isn't it? So special existence. But generally, what happens is anything that is special catches our attention. The ordinary things don't catch our attention. So Krishna is saying, while you are fighting on the battlefield, there are warriors with special skills, there are special weapons, there are special animals, they will catch your attention. But the speciality of those special things comes from me. It is my manifestation of a spark of my glory. In this way, even on the battlefield, you can remember me. So when we are working in our professional world, in our professions, we may see some people who are brilliant. Now we could just have a dichotomy that these are all materialistic people and they're all illusion. And that's one way of looking at it. Another way is, oh, this person has a special ability. This ability is a manifestation of Krishna. This is Krishna's special ability manifesting over here. Now, of course, there's one important point over here that all attractive things come from Krishna. But all attractive things don't take us to Krishna. Everything attractive comes from Krishna. So even as a singer who is singing completely sensual songs, triggering all kinds of lust within people, that ability to sing is coming from Krishna. But listening to that singing, it's attractive, but it's not going to take us to Krishna. Why? Because that vibhuti is not being used in Krishna's service. It's like you can say that if there is a, once I was asked this question, that if God wants us to do good things, then why are the good choices so few and the bad choices so many? If God wants us to do good things, then why are the bad choices so many and the good choices so few? I replied, that's how it always is in any multiple choice exam. Now, why there are 5 choices? 4 wrong, 1 right. And you can take it further. All the choices come from the teacher, but all choices won't take you to the teacher. So what has happened is, everything attractive comes from Krishna. But we have to focus on those attractive things which will take us toward Krishna. So we don't have to deny. Suppose some singer is singing mundane songs. We don't have to deny that that singer doesn't have any good ability. A singer has good ability. But we don't want to be exposed to that because that will take us away from Krishna. On the other hand, somebody is singing devotional songs, Bhakti songs, and they have a sweet voice. That ability will take us toward Krishna. As a service, anybody who is doing kirtan will participate in that kirtan. But if somebody has a specially sweet voice, we will naturally be attracted to it. Immersing ourselves will be easier. So we understand this is the ability that comes from Krishna, and this ability will take me toward Krishna. So it's interesting in this particular chapter. I'll conclude with this point. I don't think we'll go to the 11th chapter today. So here there is an interesting dynamic. See, there are some questions that are explicitly asked and some questions that are implicit. And Vishwanath Thakur is especially empowered to unpack these implicit questions. So what happens is, here toward the end of this list of vibhuti, Krishna speaks that Vrishnina Vasudevosmi Pandavanamaham, among the Pandavas I am. And Arjuna, out of his natural humanity, thinks that Krishna will speak Pandavanamaham Yudhishthira. And among the Pandavas I am Yudhishthira. But what happens? What does Krishna speak? Pandavanamaham Dhananjaya. I am Arjuna among the Pandavas. Now this Vibhuti Yoga can sometimes, the chapter of Vibhuti can be seen as pantheistic. Pantheistic means what? Does anyone know what is pantheism?
God in nature.
Yeah. It's everything is God, basically. Everything is God. Now, in one sense, yes. See, God is in everything. But it is not that God is everything. They're two different things. God is in everything, not that God is everything. When Prahlad was asked by Hiranyakashipu, where is your Vishnu? Is he in this pillar? He said, yes, he's in this pillar. And then the pillar, when Hiranyakashipu hit the pillar burst apart. And Narasimhadev came out of it. Now, at that time, Prahlad didn't go and garland the pillar. He garlanded the Lord who came out of the pillar. So, God is in everything. God is not everything. So, pantheism, what is wrong with it is, it says that God is everything, and therefore, essentially, God has no self-existence left. That is the problem. So sometimes some people think that this chapter is teaching pantheism. How God is everything. If it were teaching pantheism, then at this point, when Krishna says, among the Pandavas, I am Dhananjay. Arjuna could have said, Krishna, we two are one. There's no need for you to enlighten me. Shut up now. Whatever you know, I know. Now, what is the difference? There's no difference. So this is not literal oneness. This is divine manifestation. So that is the difference. Now, Pandavana Maham Dhananjay. Now, Sir Arjuna may get the question, why does Krishna refer to me and not to Yudhishthira? So there are many reasons given, but one major reason I'll focus on this is that, see, what happens is that among the Pandavas, Arjuna is the balancer. So Yudhishthira is extremely pacific. Pacific, sometimes we have got the use of pacific to the Pacific Ocean. Well, Pacific actually means one who doesn't want to fight. And it's very peaceful. And Bhima is what?
Aggressive.
It's not just aggressive. He's aggressive. He's almost like itching for a fight. Looking for an excuse to fight, practically. So Yudhishthira at all costs try to avoid a fight. And Bhima, forget the cost, just fight. So between them, Arjuna is the balancer. Arjuna is the middle brother. He's also the middle among the 5 Pandavas, but he's actually the middle among his 2 brothers also. So sometimes when Yudhishthira is too peaceful, Arjuna says, we have to take action. And then Bhima, he gets too angry sometimes. Arjuna is expert to calm Bhima down. So he's the balancer among the 2. And how is he able to balance? Because of his devotion. So Yudhishthira has virtue, yes, and Bhima has strength. So, but virtue and strength both need to be complemented with devotion. Virtue means a person has a natural tendency to do the right thing. Strength means one has the power to do the right thing. But devotion means one has attraction to the right reality, the ultimate reality. So in that sense, Arjuna is special to Krishna. So at this point, Krishna finishes the 10th chapter, finishes that chapter by saying that actually, I can give you a list of my opulences, but I sustain the whole world with a fraction of my being. And that gives a segue to the 11th chapter, where Arjuna will ask, Krishna, can you please show me the universal form? And when I'll not go to the universal form chapter, but I just mentioned this question and we'll discuss the next question afterwards. So, in one sense, the link is natural. That Krishna just said, "Oh, I sustain the whole world with a fragment of my being." How is that? Can you just reveal that to us? So Arjuna also asked the question in a very beautiful way. He says, so earlier, okay, I'll make one, I forgot to mention this. I started that point, but I didn't complete it. In one sense, after the Chatushloki Gita, the Gita as a class has ended. See, suppose we have a class. Well, we are having a class right now, but suppose there's a class in which there is a normal discourse, and at the end of the discourse, there are question answers. So, if we consider the Bhagavad Gita to be like a discourse, it is a question-driven discourse. The question is, what is Dharma? What is my Dharma? But it is generally what is Dharma. So, that discourse, in one sense, in a linear sense, ends with the 10th chapter. When Arjuna accepts that, Krishna, you are the ultimate reality, that means doing your will is my duty. So, now, after this, it's like that question has ended, that main class has ended. Now all that happens are supplementary questions. That's why sometimes you will see the questions themselves don't have an immediate link with what came previously. For example, at the start of 13th chapter, when Arjuna suddenly asks about Kshetra, Kshetragya, Jnana, Gyeya, Purusha, Prakriti. Now these 6 terms have never been used by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. It's not just in the previous verses or previous chapter. Nowhere in the Gita has used the word, Krishna used the word Kshetragya, for example. So why is Arjuna asking this? So this is, what is happening is, here, Arjuna has now been given a worldview by Krishna in the Gita. And Arjuna was not spiritually ignorant before this. He knew some things about spirituality. So Arjuna wants to know that in the worldview that you have given me, Krishna, all these terms, how do they fit in? So these are the terms of Sankhya. How do the Sankhya fit into the Bhakti worldview that you've given? And that will become the segue for Arjuna, for Krishna to move, the segue, the transition for Krishna to move into the Jnana section. The Jnana section is where he'll start from chapter 13 to 18. He'll focus on Jnana and how Jnana leads to Bhakti. But at this point, what happens is, when Arjuna is asking this 11th chapter question, what is happening here also, he says that, how can we say that the Bhagavad Gita is ended over here? Because here, Arjuna speaks the same thing that he also speaks at the end of the Gita. At the end of the Gita, he says, Nashto moha smriti labdha. And here also he says, Mohoyam vigato mama. And at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, also he says that, actually, here also says, Madanugraha, Paramam Krishna, by your mercy, you have given me this knowledge and my moha is gone. So if the moha is gone, what is the reason to speak more? He is inquiring for deepening his understanding. So, Krishna, you just told about the universal form. Please, can you reveal this universal form to me? So Prabhupada explains in his purport that Arjuna is not asking this question for himself. Krishna has spoken his supreme position. Now, Arjuna wants the world to know that it is not that Krishna is simply bragging, that Krishna can walk his talk. When Krishna says he sustains the universe, he can demonstrate that. So the question here is not so much because it is a personal inquiry. The personal inquiry is there, but it's primarily, it is to give a visual demonstration of Krishna's verbal declaration. Krishna, please give a visual demonstration. How does he ask this question also? He asks in a very humble way. Manyase yadi tachakyam maya drashtumiti prabho yogeshwar tato me tvam darshayatmanam avyayam. He says, Manyase yadi tachakyam. My dear Lord, if it is possible for me, if I am qualified for it, then please show your universal form to me. So Prabhupada writes in a Bhagavatam purport, a devotee always desires to have darshan of the Lord, but a devotee never demands the darshan of the Lord. And this is the mood that Arjuna is demonstrating over here. If we demand, then where is our submission? Where is our service attitude? But if we don't desire only, then where is our devotion? Isn't it? So the desire has to be there, but the demand is not there. So that is the mood that Arjuna is demonstrating over here. If you think it is qualified, then it is my desire. Maya drashtamiti prabho. And in response, Krishna will reveal the universal form. So I'll summarize what we discussed today. We started with the end of the 4th chapter. At the end of the 4th chapter, Krishna mixes the metaphorical and the literal, because Krishna is addressing both the universal and the specific. So the metaphorical war is inner, the literal war is external. And therefore he says, fight with the sword of knowledge, but fight, rise and fight. So Arjuna gets confused. What do you want me to do? And thus he asks once again. And then Krishna answers the question by talking deeper about Karma Yoga. And then he goes to a sneak peek of Jnana Yoga and Bhakti Yoga. Then in Jnana Yoga he says, when can we renounce the world? When our mind has stopped being our enemy. We largely prevent our mind from driving us mad by living in society, because social pressure, social expectation regulates most of the mind's wild suggestions. But when we are alone, then we are alone with the mind, and that's very dangerous. It's interesting that Arjuna, when he says, after hearing the yoga process, this is difficult. What he's saying, he's not talking about externally going to the jungle and sitting in meditation as difficult. He's saying the equal vision that is essential for spiritual realization, that is very difficult. And we discussed in the 2 answers that Krishna gives, Krishna demonstrates empathy. First, he assures that. First, he assures that, oh Arjuna, yes, it's very difficult to control the mind. And then when he says, oh, actually, if it takes too long, he says, don't worry, you'll never meet with destruction. So Krishna demonstrates, so we discussed teaching, education means encouraging and enlightening in the right blend. And especially when the student is disheartened or disturbed emotionally, then first encourage, then enlighten. The 7th chapter involves a shift. So what Krishna has described from Karma Yoga to Dhyana Yoga to Bhakti Yoga, now Krishna will tell directly how you can practice Bhakti Yoga. That's what, for that, Krishna describes how he is the sustaining principle of all of existence. And then Krishna drops some terms to see how Arjuna is attentive. And Arjuna very attentively responds to inquiring about all the terms. And Krishna tersely answers the questions and focuses on the relevant prayana kala. Why? Because Arjuna is facing possible death on the battlefield, not as possible, probable death on the battlefield. And not his death, but the death of his loved one, at least. And also, Krishna uses the Antakal as a parameter for comparing Bhakti Yoga and Ashtanga Yoga. And he says that to remember, to attain perfection by Ashtanga Yoga, one has to die at a particular point. Like, whereas in Bhakti Yoga, just remember and you will depart. And he concludes by saying how Bhakti Yoga provides everything that other yoga provides and more. And how that is there, that is described in the 9th chapter. When he says Bhakti Yoga is results that are eternal, the practice is simple, the process is transformational. Even if somebody is simple, the process is universal. Everybody can practice it. Then he goes on and in the 10th chapter, he further describes Bhakti, and that is summarized in Chatushloki. And when Arjuna repeats Param Brahma Param, declares Param Brahma Param Nama, that is, Arjuna is the original student through his words, revealing what is the Gita's sadhya, that is Bhagavan. Then Arjuna asks, at this point, once the Gita ends, Krishna's discourse ends, okay, how can I remember you in this world? That means, how can I remember in the battlefield? And Krishna says, whoever has any special ability, any special manifestation you see, that is my ability. So everything attractive comes from Krishna, but we need to focus on those attractive things which will take us toward Krishna. And then Krishna says, among the Pandavas, I am Arjuna, not because he's pantheistic, but because it is basically, he's saying that this is a special manifestation. Arjuna is the balancer among Krishna and among the Pandavas, among Bhima and Yudhishthira. And in the 11th chapter, Arjuna demonstrates his conviction that he's free from illusion, but still he asks the question for benefiting others. And he also demonstrates devotion in desiring but not demanding. Manyase ditachakya. So how Krishna reveals the universal form, that we will discuss in the next chapter, and we'll have to rush, but we will try to complete chapters 12 to 18 in our last session tomorrow. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki Jai. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki Jai. Gaur Premanande. Sorry?
Any questions?
Okay, we have time. I thought it's 9 o'clock. Okay, any one question? One or two questions anybody has?
Krishna also speaks about the universal form in the 9th chapter.
Yeah. Okay.
So
there are multiple threads for connecting this. See, at one level, Krishna, when okay, should I put it? See, sometimes a speaker has spoken a subject, and then the audience asks about the same subject which the speaker also wanted to elaborate. So then what happens is the speaker's intent and the audience desire goes together. So Krishna has, in one sense, succinctly talked about the universal form. Basically what happens, this is a little technical, but Krishna talks about those who see him personally and those who consider his personal form to be an illusion. That's 9, 11, 12 is Avajananti Mamoda, and 9, 13, 14 is Satatam Kirtayantoma, Mahatmanastu Mahaparth, those two verses. Those are like, they are the opposites. Those who consider his personhood to be the ultimate reality, that is Mahatmanastu Mahaparth, and those who consider his personhood to be an illusion to be transcended, that is Moghasha Mogha, Avajananti and Moghasha Mogha. Now, Krishna talks about those who, after that he talks about those who are in between. They don't consider the personhood to be the ultimate reality, but they don't consider it to be the illusion also. They talk about Ekatvena Pruthatvena Bahuda Vishwatomukham. So their Bahuda Vishwatomukham can refer to the universal form. And then it is Aham Karturaham Yajna and those verses that are there. They also can refer to the universal form. But it's not directly a universal form. It's more like seeing Krishna in the universe. The universal form is a specific form of vision. Whereas seeing Krishna in various things in the universe, that is a kind of universal form, but that's not exactly a form. I'll talk a little bit more about the universal form when we talk about it tomorrow.
So is there any subtle difference between Pantheism and universal form?
Okay, is there a difference between Pantheism and universal form? Well, yes, because Pantheism, see, one of the reasons why, as the Bhakti tradition doesn't accept Pantheism, is that Pantheism sort of distributes God's existence everywhere and leaves no self-existence of God. So there is another word called Panentheism. Panentheism, Panentheism. So Panentheism is a little more accurately description of Bhakti. That is, God extends throughout nature and God extends beyond nature. So God extends throughout all of nature, that's Pantheism. But the problem is, that is all there is to God. That means nature is God. That's what Pantheism becomes. But Panentheism is God extends beyond nature also. So within the universal form, depending on the level of realization of the person, generally the understanding when we talk about form means that there is a being who has the form. So it is God's universal form. That means God is there and the form is there. The form itself is not God, although the form can also be worshipped because it is a manifestation of God. But God also has self-existence. So in that sense, the universal form, if understood properly, is not Pantheism but Panentheism. It is God's form. So the universe is existing, but God is also existing as the soul of the universe. Atha Vishwesha Vishmatman Vishwamurte Swakeshu. Kunti Maharani in one of her last prayers, he says that you are Vishvesha, you are the control of the universe. Atha Vishvesha Vishwatman, you are the soul of the universe. But then Vishwamurte, you are the universe also. So this is a more inclusive understanding. God exists as the overseer of the universe. He's completely outside the universe. God exists inside the universe as the soul of the universe, Vishwatman. But then God exists as the universe itself, Vishwamurte. So that is more inclusive. Okay.
What is described in chapter 9 is more like a pantheism. Chapter 9. Whatever the universal form is, because they say that you can see Krishna in the sacrifice and obligations.
Okay. I'll have to think about it a little bit. Because what happens is these systems of class, this nomenclature also come from a different thought world. It comes more from Western thought world. So now if you say Gatir Bharta Prabhu Sakshi Nivasa Sharanam Surat Prabhava Pralaya Sthanam Idhanam Bijamavaya. There Krishna is not just talking about nature as it exists at one place. He's also talking about the destination. He's talking about the origination. So generally when people talk about nature as God, that is, okay, this is what is existing and this is divine. But nature has a source, Gatir. And then when Krishna is talking about, I am the destination, I am the origination. That is a little more than that. So I would say that is also something like Pantheism, but it is not very clearly articulated over there. So why is that considered intermediate at that point? Because at that point, you could say the interrelationship between the personal and the distributed manifestations of divinity is not very clear. When we say God's universal form, it's clear. God is there, his universal form. But there it is, okay, he's Aham Kaltur, Aham Yajna, Sadaham, Akshitam. He's talking about the rituals of sacrifice. He's talking Pitamas Jagato, Mata Dhata Pitama. He's talking about various things in the universe. But a clear articulation of the interrelationship between the two is not there. If that clear articulation would be there, if that would be understood, then these people would also be the Mahatmas. They're not Mahatmas because they are seeing the divine in the universe, but they're not having a very clear understanding of divinity and the relationship with the universe. So just like those who worship the Devatas, they also understand there is some higher being, but they don't have the clear understanding of the interrelationship between Devatas and Krishna. So it's something similar. It's an intermediate understanding. Thank you very much. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai, Shri Prabhupada ki jai, Gaur Bhagavad ki jai, Gaur Premanande.
Hare Krishna, dear devotees. So as you saw, this was the third session of this overview of Bhagavad Gita through the 17 questions of Arjuna. I'm not sure Prabhu, if you'll be able to go finish everything in the tomorrow's session, but surely we'll have continuation in your future visit. So tomorrow, 7:30, we'll have the conclusive part of this, the fourth session. So let's also express our gratitude to His Grace Chaitanya Charan Prabhu for visiting us for almost after 2.5 years. He's not in the top of his health, but still I can see his energy while delivering the class, meeting the devotees. He's extending himself beyond what his health is permitting. So let's express our love and gratitude to His Grace Chaitanya Charan Prabhu by loudly chanting Hari Bol 3 times from the core of our hearts. Hari Bol! Hari Bol! Hari Bol! Hari Bol! Thank you. You want to talk about the books too?
Okay, sorry. So for those of you who have not been there yesterday, I've written a few new books. So we don't have extra copies of those books extra, but we have one sample copy. You can order it, and within a week or so it will come to you. So much of what I spoke is based on these 2 books. I've been studying the Gita for a long time, by Krishna's mercy, but many of the thoughts have crystallized recently. So these 17 questions are listed, whatever I talked about, These are in Bhagavad Gita, relation Bhagavad Gita, the 17 questions and their answers, their context. Much of what I spoke is there in this book in terms of the Krishna-Arjuna relationship. And this is Bhagavad Gita Insights. This is more of a conceptual analysis of the Gita. When Krishna uses the word karma, what does he mean? When Krishna uses the word dharma, what are the different meanings of the word yoga in the Bhagavad Gita? Or Krishna is detached. What does it mean actually to be detached? Do we become hard-hearted? So the rational understanding the concepts of the Gita, that's in this book. Both of these books have 100 articles each. 100 questions are answered basically, and there are about 80 illustrations to make things easier to understand. Many of the black and white illustrations that you saw, the pendulum and diagrams, they're all there in this book. So this can aid in understanding Bhagavad Gita and especially appreciating Prabhupada's genius in how he has established Bhakti as the conclusion of the Gita. We can arrive at the same understanding from multiple perspectives. And this book, these two books offer some perspective, the relational and the rational perspective, for reinforcing our conviction in Prabhupada's conclusive teachings about the Gita. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. So as we said, we kind of sold out, so we are taking the orders and it will be delivered. So if you are interested, that's why we are keeping this as a sample copy. And then if you want to place the order, Narayan will can raise hand. So he can take the orders and we will be delivering the books in less than a week. Thank you. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Release my